startup. Milano Malpensa startup. This is Hawk 3015, position 658, information Papa, IFR Tenance Atlantique, request startup. Hawk 3015, startup approved. Papa correct, runway 35L, fly runway heading squawk 163, for taxi clearance call 121.90, Milano Malpensa startup control. LH2399, cleared for takeoff runway 15, Bale Mulhouse Tower. Bale Mulhouse Tower Roger, cleared for takeoff runway 15, LH2399. Milano Malpensa startup approved. Papa correct, runway 35L, fly runway heading squawk 163, for taxi clearance call 121.90, Hawk 3015. Milano Malpensa startup, switching to 121.90, Hawk 3015. Milano Malpensa startup, with you, Hawk 3015. Hawk 3015, Roger, Milano Malpensa startup. Milano Malpensa startup, request taxi clearance, Hawk 3015. Hawk 3015, cleared to taxi, Milano Malpensa startup.
18 knots.
startup.
20.
LX464, startup approved, uniform correct, runway 32,
20.
fly runway heading squawk 163, for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.90, Zurich startup control. Zurich startup approved, uniform correct, runway 32, fly runway heading squawk 163, for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.90, LX464.
Terrain.
Zurich startup, switching to 121.90, LX464. Zurich startup, with you, LX464. LX464, Roger, Zurich startup. U29043 ready to start up. LX464, pushback approved, Zurich start up. Ready to taxi, LX464. LX464, cleared to taxi, Zurich ground. Zurich ground, cleared to taxi, LX464. Milano Malpensa startup, this is U29043 position 224, information Papa, IFR to Berlin Schönefeld, request startup. U29043 startup approved, cockpit correct, runway 35L, fly runway heading squawk 163, for taxi clearance call 121.90, Milano Malpensa startup control. Milano Malpensa startup approved, cockpit correct, runway 35L, fly runway heading squawk 163, for taxi clearance call 121.90, U29043. Milano Malpensa startup, switching to 121.90, U29043. Milano Malpensa startup, with you, U29043. U29043 Roger, Milano Malpensa startup. Milano Malpensa startup, request taxi clearance, U29043. U2 9043 clear to taxi, Milano Malpensa startup. U2 2849 ready to start up. Milano Malpensa startup, this is U2 2849 position 113, information Papa, IFR to Catania Fontanarosa, request startup. U22849 startup approved. Cockpit correct. Runway 35L. Fly runway heading squawk 163. For pushback and taxi clearance call 121.90. Milano Malpensa startup control. Milano Malpensa startup approved. Cockpit correct. Runway 35L. Fly runway heading squawk 163. For pushback and taxi clearance call 121.90. U22849. Milano Malpensa startup, switching to 121.90, U22849. Milano Malpensa startup, with you, U22849. U22849 Roger, Milano Malpensa startup. Milano Malpensa startup, request pushback, U22849. U22849 pushback approved, Milano Malpensa startup. Milano Malpensa ground, ready to taxi, U22849. U22849 cleared to taxi, Milano Malpensa ground. Milano Malpensa ground, cleared to taxi, U22849. Air Portugal 823, ready to start up. LH 1861, ready to start up. Milano Malpensa startup, this is Air Portugal 823, position 302, information Papa, IFR to Lisboa, request startup. Milano Malpensa startup, this is LH1861, position 410, information Papa, IFR to München France Joseph Strauss, request startup. Air Portugal 823, startup approved, Papa correct, runway 35L, fly runway heading squawk 163, for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.90, Milano Malpensa startup control. LH1861, startup approved, Papa correct, runway 35L, fly runway heading squawk 163, for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.90, Milano Malpensa startup control. Milano Malpensa startup approved, Papa correct, runway 35L, fly runway heading squawk 163, for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.90, Air Portugal 823. Milano Malpensa startup approved, Papa correct, runway 35L, fly runway heading squawk 163, for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.90, LH1861. Milano Malpensa startup, switching to 121.90, Air Portugal 823. Milano Malpensa startup, switching to 121.90, LH1861. U2 1123 cleared for takeoff runway 33, Bale Mulhouse Tower. Milano Malpensa startup, with you, Air Portugal 823. Milano Malpensa startup, with you, LH1861. Air Portugal 823, Roger, Milano Malpensa startup. LH1861, Roger, Milano Malpensa startup. Milano Malpensa startup, request pushback, Air Portugal 823. Milano Malpensa startup, request pushback, LH1861. Air Portugal 823, pushback approved, Milano Malpensa startup. LH1861, pushback approved, Milano Malpensa startup. Milano Malpensa ground, ready to taxi, Air Portugal 823. Air Portugal 823, clear to taxi, Milano Malpensa ground. Milano Malpensa ground, clear to taxi, Air Portugal 823. Milano Malpensa ground, ready to taxi, LH1861. LH1861, clear to taxi, Milano Malpensa ground. Milano Malpensa ground, clear to taxi, LH1861. X1060, ready to start up. Milano Malpensa startup, this is X1060, position 307, information Papa, IFR to Barayaz, request startup. X1060, startup approved, cockpit correct, runway 35L, fly runway heading squawk 163, for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.90, Milano Malpensa startup control. Milano Malpensa startup approved, cockpit correct, runway 35L, fly runway heading squawk 163, for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.90, X1060. Milano Malpensa startup, switching to 121.90, X1060. Milano Malpensa startup, with you, X1060. X1060, Roger, Milano Malpensa startup. Milano Malpensa startup, request pushback, X1060. X1060, pushback approved, Milano Malpensa startup. Milano Malpensa ground, ready to taxi, X1060. X1060, clear to taxi, Milano Malpensa ground. Milano Malpensa ground, clear to taxi, X1060.
20. Terrain. 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 Pull up. Pull up. Pull up. Terrain. 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 Sink rate. Sink rate. Sink rate. Pull up. Pull up. Pull up. Pull up. 400. Approaching minimums. 300. Sink rate. Pull up. Pull up. Pull up. Pull up. 100. 50.
Bank angle. Bank angle.
40.
Bank angle.
Ready to start up. LX 1216, ready to start up. Startup, this is LX 1254, position G12 information uniform, IFR to Stockholm, Ireland, request startup. Zurich startup, this is LX 1216, position A7, information uniform, IFR to Oslo Gardermoen, request startup. LX 1254, startup approved, uniform correct, runway 34, fly runway heading squawk 163, for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.90, Zurich startup control. LX 1216, startup approved, uniform correct, runway 34, fly runway heading squawk 163, for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.90, Zurich startup control. Zurich startup approved, uniform correct, runway 34, fly runway heading squawk 163, for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.90, LX 1254. Zurich startup approved, uniform correct, runway 34, fly runway heading squawk 163, for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.90, LX 1216. Zurich startup, switching to 121.90, LX 1254. Zurich startup, switching to 121.90, LX 1216. Zurich startup, with you, LX 1254. Zurich startup, with you, LX 1216. LX 1254, Roger, Zurich startup. LX 1216, Roger, Zurich startup. Zurich startup, request pushback, LX 1254. Zurich startup, request pushback, LX 1216. LX 1254, pushback approved, Zurich startup. LX 1216, pushback approved, Zurich startup.
Sync rate. Pull up.
500.
Zurich ground, ready to taxi, LX 1216. Zurich ground, ready
Floor
to taxi,
approaching
LX
minimums
1254.
300.
LX 1254, clear to taxi, Zurich ground. Zurich ground, clear to taxi, LX 1254.
Approaching
LX
minimums.
1216, clear to taxi, Zurich ground. Zurich ground, clear to taxi, LX 1216.
Approaching minimums. Minimums. Minimums.
Easy 8436, cleared for takeoff runway 15, AMO House Tower. Alpine startup, this is Royal Air Dock 951, position 304, information cockpit, IFR to Casable Information Vehicle, request startup. Zurich startup, this is LX 970, position G11 information uniform, IFR to Berlin Teckle, request startup. Royal Air Dock 951, startup approved, cockpit correct, runway 35L, fly runway heading squawk 163, for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.90, Milano Alpine startup control. LX970, startup approved, uniform correct, runway 34, fly runway heading squawk 163, for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.90, Zurich startup control. Milano Malpensa startup approved, cockpit correct, runway 35L, fly runway heading squawk 163, for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.90, Royal Air Rock 951. Zurich startup approved, uniform correct, runway 34, fly runway heading squawk 163, for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.90, LX970. Milano Malpensa startup, switching to 121.90, Royal Air Rock 951. Zurich startup, switching to 121.90, LX970. Milano Malpensa startup, with you, Royal Air Rock 951. Zurich startup, with you, LX970. Royal Air Rock 951, Rockshire, Milano Malpensa startup. LX970, Rockshire, Zurich startup. Milano Malpensa startup, request pushback, Royal Air Rock 951. Zurich startup, request pushback, LX970. Royal Air Rock 951, pushback approved, Milano Malpensa startup. LX970, pushback approved, Zurich startup. Zurich ground, ready to taxi, LX970. Milano Malpensa ground, ready to taxi, Royal Air Rock 951. LX970, clear to taxi, Zurich ground. Royal Air Rock 951, clear to taxi, Milano Malpensa ground. Zurich ground, clear to taxi, LX970. Milano Malpensa ground, clear to taxi, Royal Air Rock 951. U2 1133 cleared for takeoff runway 15, Aylmo House Tower.
2500. 2500.
LX 2032, ready to start up.
25.
Gusts 514, ready to start up.
2500. 2500. 2500. 2500. Twenty-five hundred. 2500. 2500.
Zurich startup, this is LX 2032, position
2500.
deploy information uniform, IFR to Barayaz, request startup. Milano Malpensa startup, this is US 514, position 309, information Papa, IFR to Wien Schwechat, request startup. W677-72 cleared for takeoff runway 15, Aylmo House Tower. LX 2032, startup approved, uniform correct, runway 32, fly runway heading squawk 163, for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.90, Zurich startup control. COS 514, startup approved, copy correct, runway 35L, fly runway heading squawk 163,
1000.
for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.90, Milano Malpensa startup control. Zurich startup approved, uniform correct, runway 32, fly runway heading squawk 163, for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.90, LX 2032. Milano Malpensa startup approved, copy correct, runway 35L, fly runway heading squawk 163, for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.90, COS 514. Zurich startup, switching to 121.90, LX 2032. Milano Malpensa startup, switching to 121.90, COS 514. Zurich startup, with you, LX 2032. Milano
500.
Malpensa startup, with you, COS 514.
Sync rate. Approaching
LX
Automotes.
2032, Roger, Zurich startup. COS
300. Sync rate.
514, Roger,
Pull up.
Milano Malpensa
up.
startup.
Pull up.
Zurich startup,
100.
request pushback, LX 2032. Milano Malpensa
50.
startup, request pushback,
30.
COS 514.
10.
LX 2032, pushback approved, Zurich startup. COS 514, pushback approved, Milano Malpensa startup. Zurich ground, ready to taxi, LX 2032. Milano Malpensa ground, ready to taxi, COS 514. LX 2032, clear to taxi, Zurich ground. COS 514, clear to taxi, Milano Malpensa ground. Zurich ground, clear to taxi, LX 2032. Milano Malpensa ground, clear to taxi, COS 514. PC 942, cleared for takeoff runway 15, Vale House Tower. Replay active. S to stop. CTRLR to show replay controls.
Sync rate.
Approaching minimums. 300.
Sync rate. Pull up. Pull up. Pull up.
100. 50. 30. 10.
Ready to start up. Milano Malpensa startup. This is an startup. This is Alpine startup. This is Milano Malpensa startup. Switching to 121.90 SV944. Milano Malpensa startup with you SV944. Zurich startup with you, LX1058.
100.
Zurich startup with you, WK398. Milano Malpensa startup with you, MS706.
10.
SV944, Roger, Milano Malpensa startup. LX1058, Roger, Zurich startup. WK398, Roger, Zurich startup. MS706, Roger, Milano Malpensa startup. Milano Malpensa startup, request taxi clearance, MS706, LX1058, Milano Malpensa startup, pushback to taxi, Milano Malpensa startup, Milano startup, LX1000 taxi, SV944, Milano taxi, Milano taxi, LX1000 1376 position D2 information position 1000 in position 4K7 position 96 uniform 34 West